In the fall of 1997, the neighborhood surrounding the University of Alabama became the hunting ground of a sexual predator. His vicious nighttime attacks left the quiet college community gripped by fear.
Captain Larry Montgomery, with the University of Alabama Department of Public Safety, was assigned to investigate the sexual assault of Sheila Rose.
I was notified at approximately 10:20 p.m. To respond to the hospital that we had a rape victim there.
And I know it's not easy for you, but I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions.
Understandably, victims of sexual assault have difficulty talking about the incident. Fortunately, that was not true in this case.
Yeah, he was kind of tall.
The victim described the suspect as a white male, approximately 5'10", 160 pounds, with brown hair, armed with a black handgun.
Sheila told Detective Montgomery that the rapist forced her at gunpoint to drive to a secluded area near Black Warrior River. There, she was raped. After the assault, Sheila's attacker ordered her to drive back into town.
Other than the physical description, we had DNA evidence collected from the sexual assault kit. The Department of Forensic Sciences in Birmingham patterned that DNA. Even though we did not have a suspect to match the DNA up with at that time, it was evidence in the bank. At some point in time when we developed a suspect, we would be able to make a positive identification.
"38 hours after the assault, Tuscaloosa police investigator Mike Everett joined the investigation.
One of the very first things we try to do in these sexual assaults is try to determine registered sex offenders that might possibly be suspects as far as descriptions and things like that go.
We did a computer search on our Spellman system, which is a computer program data bank for all sex offenders. We put in what information we're looking for, and we pulled up all the names of the white male sex offenders that were in the system. We began the process of elimination, and we were unable to identify a suspect from the list of known sex offenders.
Investigators were at a dead end, and it was only a matter of time before the rapist would strike again.
Most of these type cases, we usually assume that it's going to happen again.
Headquarters is 1020.
But basically all you can do at that point is notify your patrol units and beef up our patrols.
1020, disregard.
You know it's going to happen again, and you hope that the next time it does, he's going to make a mistake.
Unfortunately, authorities would not have to wait long. Just 6 weeks later, another vicious attack occurred. A serial rapist was terrorizing the University of Alabama campus, and no one, it seemed, could stop him.
Investigators' worst fears had been realized. The university rapist had assaulted 2 more co-eds. A sexual predator was on the loose, and detectives worked round the clock to stop him before he could strike again.
Larry Montgomery and Mike Everett were informed that the university rapist's latest victims were being treated at the DCH Regional Hospital.
Hi, I'm Officer Montgomery, and I was wondering if I can ask you a few questions.
I cannot say enough about the courage and strength of the young ladies in this case, especially some of the specific details.
Did you get a good look at them?
He was wearing a white shirt.
Okay, everybody quiet.
Like the other victims, the 2 young women were taken by surprise as they were getting into their car. They were abducted at gunpoint and forced to drive to a secluded area where both were sexually assaulted.
In the interviews that we do with these victims, we try to get them to be as specific as they possibly can. Anything that might stand out about these people is very, very important.
The two women described this suspect as a white male, 25 to 35 years of age, carrying a black handgun with a baby blue bandana covering the lower portion of his face.
It was vitally important that the community be warned about the rapist, but authorities were careful not to incite panic or compromise the investigation.
In order to inform the public that an incident had happened, the University of Alabama Department of Public Safety issued a crime alert. A poster with information about the incident, the location, and as much of a description of the suspect that we could release without damaging the investigation. Those posters were placed at various places around campus. Those releases are also released to the news media.
Investigators say the two students were walking to their car here on Reed Street. That's when a white man in his late 20s to early 30s forced the women into their car and took them several miles west of campus, raping one woman and sexually assaulting the other.
Two women saw the news coverage of the assaults and called to report some suspicious activity that they had observed in the parking lot of their apartment complex.
Well, we were out exercising and we saw a weird guy in a car.
The two females were doing their afternoon exercises, walking around the parking lot. On the first lap around the lot, they observed a white male sitting in a dirty white Jeep Wagoneer. When they got closer, they observed him loading a handgun, and he had a bandana covering part of his face. They continued walking, and the white male drove away.
The vehicle description provided investigators with a vital clue.
I contacted the Alabama Criminal Justice Center and requested that they provide me a list of all white, beige, and cream-colored Jeep Wagoneers registered in Tuscaloosa County and surrounding counties. They provided me a list of approximately 50 vehicles.
One of the names on the list was Lee Antone Ross, a local print shop employee with a history of deviant sexual behavior. Ross also matched the physical description given by the victims.
Ross definitely fit the profile of a rapist because he had prior problems with indecent exposure on campus here. It led us to believe that he was a good suspect in this case.
Lee Antone Ross?
Yeah.
After investigators secured a search warrant to obtain blood samples and photographs, Lee Antone Ross was brought down to the Tuscaloosa police station.
Mr. Ross was not under arrest at this time. He was merely complying with the order of the court in the search warrant.
Look straight into the camera.
I took Polaroid photographs, and a registered nurse from an agency that we use came to the office and took a blood sample for comparison of the DNA evidence that we had obtained in the sexual assault kits.
Ross was released pending the DNA results. In the meantime, detectives showed victims a photo lineup.
The way we do photo lineups when we have multiple victims is we separate those victims so that they cannot influence each other.
Definitely him.
Are you sure?
Absolutely.
Both victims positively identified Lee Antone Ross as the person that had kidnapped and sexually assaulted them.
Based on the positive identification by two victims, an arrest warrant was immediately issued for Lee Antone Ross.
At that time, Mr. Ross was handcuffed and taken to the Tuscaloosa County Jail and booked. There was no attempt to interview him since he had earlier invoked his constitutional right not to make any statements or any comments.
Detectives were confident that the university rapist was now in custody.
After Lee Antone Ross was arrested and charged for 3 sexual assaults near the University of Alabama, campus life slowly returned to normal. After Lee Antone Ross was arrested and charged for 3 sexual assaults near the University of Alabama, campus life slowly returned to normal, but not for his victims. In order to put the notorious university rapist behind bars, each woman would have to relive her nightmarish ordeal in open court.
Deputy District Attorney Marie Trubig Prine was the lead prosecutor in the Lee Antone Ross rape trial.
It is quite common for victims to be very scared to testify. These particular women were determined that they were going to testify against this man and that he was going to be brought to justice if there was anything that they could do about it.
Can you please tell me?
Although difficult, Prine had each victim account in graphic detail their sexual assaults.
I was leaving my apartment, and
the first victim was at her apartment complex. She stopped to get her mail. She got in the car. She left the door ajar so that she could look through the mail with the light on. And during those few seconds while the door was ajar, Lee Antone Ross approached her with a gun. She started screaming, and he forced her into the car and forced her to drive. He directed her which way to go and eventually got her to an area along the Black Warrior River where he made her pull over and he raped her. After the rape, he made her drive back where she'd originally been abducted. He made her drop him off and wait 2 minutes before she could leave.
he got out of the car and said, "Thanks for the good time."
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ross showed no emotion as the young women described their attacks.
We were on our way to a party, and we were putting the stuff in our car.
The two other women, they'd gone to one of the women's apartments to pick up some stuff. And when the two of them got down to the car and were putting items in the car, Mr. Ross approached one of the victims.
The victims told how their friendship and concern for one another was used against them that night.
He held her at gunpoint and told the other woman that if she ran away or screamed, he would kill her friend. He made them drive, giving very specific directions. During the time that he would have one driving, he raped one, then he would make them switch places, and then he sexually abused the other girl.
Can you identify him?
That man right there.
All three victims positively identified Ross as their attacker.
These women were strong enough during these horrible attacks to try and pay attention as best they could to what they could see of him. They all said that they recognized his eyes and his forehead and his hair and things like that. Of course, once they saw him, they knew they had the right person.
Lee Antone Ross claimed he had nothing to do with the sexual assaults, but that he was the innocent victim of mistaken identity.
I was having dinner with my brother and sister that Wednesday night, as I do every Wednesday night.
Well, The defense attempted to say that these women could not have identified him correctly because it was dark, because he had a bandana over his face, whoever had done this, that it was just a whole series of mistakes, that yes, they had been raped, but Leanton Ross was not the one that did it.
But when it came to the DNA evidence, the defense had little room for argument.
The way they answered the DNA evidence was an attempt to say that the tests were not valid, or that the statistics as to the probability that it was Leanton Ross were just wrong, because the results were very precise in this case. 1 in 8 billion is the chance that another individual would have this DNA.
Your Honor, we have no further questions at this time.
The odds were clearly stacked against Leanton Ross as the jury retired to deliberate. After 3 days of testimony, it took the jury less than an hour to find Leanton Ross guilty of sexual abuse, rape, and kidnapping. He was sentenced to 160 years behind bars.
When the verdict came in, the victims were very tearful. They embraced their family members. They embraced us. They were relieved that he had been found guilty, but it was also a very emotional moment for them.
Leanton Ross is currently incarcerated at the Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama.
In the United States, more than 700 women are sexually assaulted every day. Unfortunately, because of the stigma associated with rape, many of these attacks are never reported. However, increased awareness and innovative support programs are now helping victims and their loved ones cope with the tragic effects of these crimes. I'm Brian Dennehy. Join me for the next episode of Arrest and Trial.
Stabbed to death for the combination to a safe, a shopkeeper's killer is brought to justice tomorrow night in another all-new Arrest and Trial. A double bill kicks off at 8.
Join the investigation.
One of the very first things we try to do in these sexual assaults is try to determine registered sex offenders that might possibly be suspects as far as descriptions and things like that go.
We did a computer search on our Spellman system, which is a computer program data bank for all sex offenders. We put in what information we're looking for, and we pulled up all the names of the white male sex offenders that were in the system. We began to the hospital that we had a rape victim there.
And I know it's not easy for you, but I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions.
Understandably, victims of sexual assault have difficulty talking about the incident. Fortunately, that was not true in this case.
Yeah, he was kind of tall.
The victim described the suspect as a white male, approximately 5'10", 160 pounds, with brown hair, armed.
In the fall of 1997, the neighborhood surrounding the University of Alabama became the hunting ground of a sexual predator. His vicious nighttime attacks left the quiet college community gripped by fear.
Captain Larry Montgomery, with the University of Alabama Department of Public Safety, was assigned to investigate the sexual assault of Sheila Rose.
I was notified at approximately 10:20 p.m. To respond to the Birmingham pattern, that DNA. Even though we did not have a suspect to match the DNA up with at that time, it was evidence in the bank. At some point in time when we developed a suspect, we would be able to make a positive identification.
"38 hours after the assault, Tuscaloosa police investigator Mike Everett,
with a black handgun.
Sheila told Detective Montgomery that the rapist forced her at gunpoint to drive to a secluded area near Black Warrior River There, she was raped. After the assault, Sheila's attacker ordered her to drive back into town.
Other than the physical description, we had DNA evidence collected from the sexual assault kit. The Department of Forensic Sciences